Welcome to Lesson 4 of Caregiver University. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to use a Hoyer lift. Hoyer lifts and other lift equipment are tools that caregivers can use when the consumer is too heavy for them to lift or transfer by themselves. Hoyer lifts can also be used to avoid repetitive lifting throughout the day. This can prevent overuse injuries and strains. Before using heavy equipment like a Hoyer lift, it's very important to familiarize yourself with all the parts of the lift and make sure that you know how exactly to operate it. It's also important to always be aware of the lift's weight capacity to make sure that you don't ever cause injury to yourself or others. Before using a Hoyer lift on a consumer, it might be helpful to practice operating the lift while transferring another employee. This is a way to make sure that you complete all the steps of the transfer correctly and that you're confident in your abilities to operate the lift. Choosing the correct sling. The first step to using a Hoyer lift for a transfer is choosing the correct size sling. To select an appropriate size sling, you will use the consumer's height, weight, and the width of their hips to match the specifications that are listed on the sling. There's often either a tag or it's printed directly on the sling material. It will say the size of the sling and what size person the sling is made to fit. A properly fitted sling will allow room to fit the consumer's head, trunk, and buttocks, but it will fit snugly to prevent any moving around or sliding out during the transfer. Next, you will position the sling. This is often done while the consumer is lying on their back on a bed or other surface. You will start by arranging the sling on the bed above the consumer's head. This will be done in the shape of an upside-down U. The curved part of the U will start at the top of the consumer's head and go around either side of their body and down to the base of their spine. The narrow sides of the U will continue down and will go along the consumer's thighs. This is a picture of an example of how you might place the sling. It's kind of hard to see the U shape here, but the curved part is up here by the head and shoulders, and the narrow parts are going down along the sides. While continuing to position the sling, it will be easiest to arrange the sling underneath the consumer by rolling them from side to side. This will be done by rolling them to one side, spreading out one side of the sling beneath them, flattening it out, rolling them back on their back, and then rolling them to the opposite side so that you can lay the other side of the sling down underneath them. It's very important to make sure that the sling is completely flat underneath the consumer and that there are no wrinkles. Wrinkles have the potential to tear the consumer's skin or cause injury when using the lift, and we want to minimize any chance for skin breakdown that we can. Once the sling is in place, the narrow parts of the U will come back up between the thighs and wrap around each thigh, and they will meet in the middle. Then you will cross the straps so that it can be used to secure the consumer during the transfer and prevent any sliding. Here is an example of how you can roll a consumer from side to side to place the sling. Like I said before, they'll lay on their side, and you can go ahead and place one half of the sling and straighten it out, then roll them on their back again, and then to the other side so that you can place the other half of the sling. Once you have the sling in position, you can start positioning the lift. During this step, it's important that the operator of the lift is aware of all parts of the machine at all times. This is important because some parts of the lift are free moving and can cause injury if not managed properly. It's also possible that the consumer, yourself, or anyone else involved could accidentally hit themselves on part of the lift if they're not paying attention. When positioning the lift, the first step is clearing the path of obstacles. You want to scan the room to make sure that there are no obstacles in the path that the lift will travel. You also want to make sure that there is enough room below, above, and around the area where you are going to position the lift before moving it there. This means that if you're going to pick up the consumer from somewhere such as their bed, you want to make sure that the Hoyer lift base can fit under the bed, that the top of the sling bar and the height of the lift can fit above the consumer's bed, and you want to make sure that there's enough area around the lift and the bed so that you're able to attach the sling and operate the lift safely. Once these steps are done, you can roll the lift base underneath the bed as close to the consumer as you can get. The sling bar, which is the part overhead, should be directly above the consumer. This is one part where you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the lift in the sling bar. Sometimes the sling bar moves a little and it could hit you or the consumer in the head. So it's important to pay attention and prevent this if possible. Once the lift is positioned correctly above the consumer, you want to make sure that the legs of the base are set to the widest position. This relates back to one of the concepts of body mechanics, where a wide base of support increases your stability and control. So that's why we want to keep the legs of the base wide here too. Then you will lock the wheels and use the controls on the lift to start lowering the sling bar close to the consumer so you can attach their sling. Once you've placed the lift, you can begin attaching the sling. You'll start by attaching the loops of the strap on the sling to the sling bar. Make sure that none of the straps become twisted during this part, because this can cause the sling to pinch the consumer's skin, and it can make the connection for the sling unsafe. Once you've attached all of the loops, the sling should be positioned to provide balance, security, and support. It's important to remember to keep the consumer's weight centered over the legs of the base at all times. This is done to make sure that you can maintain control of the lift during the transfer and to make sure the weight does not become unevenly distributed, causing the lift to tip. Next, you can unlock the wheels of the base. and then use the controls on the lift to begin slowly lifting the sling and the consumer just about 2 inches. At this point, with the consumer raised 2 inches, you want to complete the following safety checks before continuing to raise the sling. First, you want to make sure that all of the loops of the sling are still connected to the sling bar. Next, you want to make sure that the consumer's weight is still centered over the base. Then you can inspect the sling to make sure that it's not pinching or pulling any areas of the consumer's skin. It's important to check to make sure that the sling is not pinching or pulling, because once we start to raise the lift in the sling becomes more taut, which gives it the potential to pinch or pull the skin. This is when you can also ask the consumer if they're comfortable, and you can also visually assess them for any nonverbal signs of discomfort, like grimacing or making some type of face. This is especially important for consumers that do not communicate verbally as well, because if they're uncomfortable or in pain, you'll usually see it on their face. Here's a picture of what the sling and the lift will look like while it's raised the 2 inches during the safety check. You'll see that it's still positioned over the bed, and the legs of the base are under it, making the sling and the consumer still centered over the base. You'll also see that the sling is very smooth throughout, which means that it's likely not pinching or pulling the skin anywhere. You can also see that this part of the sling is crossed over, like I mentioned before, and you'll see how it prevents the consumer from sliding forward or out of the sling. You'll also see that the straps are up and connected to the sling bar. They're in the right position, and they don't look like they're going to become detached or disconnected at all. At this point, the consumer in the sling might be moving around a little, since this part of the lift is usually free moving. You may want to brace them to keep them in one position like this lady is doing, to prevent them from becoming twisted or moving too much. After completing the safety checks and making sure that everything's okay, you can start raising the lift. At this point, you'll raise the lift to the height that the transfer requires. This height makes sure that the sling and the consumer are clearing any parts of the bed or furniture that may be in the way, but it's not going unnecessarily high. However, make sure that you don't try to hold the straps or the sling while it's being lowered, because this could cause the straps to move and potentially detach from the lift, which could cause injury. Once you have finished lowering the consumer completely, you can begin removing the straps from the sling bar. At this point, just remember to make sure that you're being aware of the sling bar so that it doesn't hit yourself or the consumer in the head. Once the straps are removed, you can start removing the sling from beneath the consumer using the same steps that you used to place it. So rolling to the side, pulling half out, and then rolling to the other side. This is the end of lesson 4. Please go to the following slide and complete the quiz.